Hello, everyone. This is Bob here. I'm going to do a live reading of my fourth book, $1,000 an Hour, because I want an audio book of it, but this seems like the easiest way to do it. Like, I have a file of the book and I can just read it, and then I can have audio of it, because I really, really like my book. I like rereading it, but I also want to have audio of it. I want to express myself in all wavelengths. So here we go. Here we go. It's loading. There we go. Introduction. You're fucked. You have no rights. Well, from my perspective, I had no rights, and I still seem to have more rights than you. You're fucked. Here's how I got fucked, and how I intend to unfuck myself. But the world's just been aggressively fucked up like the entire time humanity has been here, and I need to make some speeches about it. Yes, it's that time for Stream of Consciousness podcasts with Bob, or whatever. Because holy shit, have you been lucid since the last time I wrote books and stuff? Shit has really hit the fan, and the roaring 20s have just begun. I don't even know, man. I'm scared, but I'm always scared because humanity is a prey species. We need to talk about the prey species. They're burning to death in Australia. There's going to be less sections, but more fleshed out. They are of grave importance. I'm fucked. Well, I've given over to the dark side. More specifically, I've decided to stop hiding from the fact that I'm very much completely psychotic and all of the time. My life is still mundane, there's still things I gotta take care of, but I'm very completely insane. I saw a caricature of who I am now, the jock who laughs. It's basically the Batman who laughs, but that's me. I have that ability to see people at their absolute best and absolute worst simultaneously. I'm glad DC explained it. I know that's why I love them. It's pretty awesome. People don't even have to admit stuff to you. You just know things. You start talking, and suddenly their eyes are lighting up as their hopes and dreams get validated. If you're being nice. If you're naughty, you go for the throat. I also have a constant synchronicity. I heard it called a slipstream technology on the Strug Life Syndicate over on Reddit, where I currently have 33 followers. I seem to slip into situations and conversations with the most intelligent and charismatic people around. I saw two doctors married in a Chili's and felt like I was in a mockumentary like The Office. It's very easy to convert me from one emotional wavelength to the other. I'm either manic or depressed. That's defined in the schizoaffective diagnosis. Either you're making me euphoric or you're making me depressed, actively and passively, and the effect is multiplied over a room. And now I no longer control the dial, it controls me. They say I owe $16,000 in student loan debt. I say, fine, Jock owes you that, but what do you owe Bob for services rendered? Because I don't write for free, only to free. And if I still have to free someone, it won't be as funny later. Here's an example of one of the last essays I wrote for my beloved master's program before I became convinced they swindled me. Psychopomp plans. As someone meticulously curated into the most pompous form of psychosis imaginable under genocidal America, America refers to the settler colonial state responsible for the most grievous crimes against sentience and conceivable human existence that currently and eternally polices all currently debated thought waves allowable with respect to a grateful yet arbitrarily complex tyrant. It's hard for me to take life as seriously as others. Americans are born believing Rome was a nice place to live. And when in Rome, Americans must roam. It just is how it is, usually as I say it is, arbitrarily paralleling it as others have said it. I have plans meticulously cultivated in 8-minute projections of the existence of life with respect to the fusion of our local stellar stabilizing gravity well, Sol or Apollo or Dyson, which is my personal interpretation of the nuclear reactor observing us and killing us on whims with respect to arbitrary moral failings. And I am expected to maintain a single yet consistent train of thought arbitrarily into a future that only exists as an entangled desire, arbitrarily cosigned to my central finite curve. It's weird. People's paychecks depend on it as the economy is aggressively privatized and sold to petty tyrants who scurry from the fear of the retribution their karma has heralded. I have to pretend to know nothing of Orson Scott Card to even be eligible for a demerit for a lack of citation I never, ever, in a single instant, have ever once cared to give credence or authority to. They expect me to cite him 8 novels into a navigational tool, just to recontextualize late-stage Earth under the heel of the hegemen, or at least craft masterpiece they want to be able to mock immediately and then herald as undiscovered genius after I die in the misery and poverty, millions upon millions upon millions. Satirist note, there are 7 billion humans. Each billion is 1,000 millions. Most of those humans are suffering simultaneously with respect to any minor discomfort to noticing the joke I continuously use to personal amusement. Upon millions upon millions upon millions upon millions. To be clear, the level of verbosity is intentionally gratuitous, specifically to hammer in the severity of the situation I've analyzed and laughed about. Upon millions upon millions upon millions, the gratuitous nature thus captured, the bit is only cathartic in nature, and so can be said for as long as it takes me to end it with etc., etc., etc. Upon millions upon millions, insert etc. as necessary here, have also died in and continue to die in right now with respect to identities, myself humbly included, to preempt pompous psychophantic naysayers that believe they meaningfully helped our suffering in any reasonable sense. I would try to renounce the responsibility of correcting everyone everywhere with respect to my continuously and rigorously analyzed universe. In the midst of as painful a psychotic break as could be endured, I publicly and shamefully renounced the role of hegemen, and laboriously crafted a viable antithetical modality as ex-hegemen, as synthesis of the character of Wintergreen in Catch-22. And yet, 3 years after this event that motivated the trilogy I published to very little applause and acclaim, I'm expected to do better. I need an American dream better than hegemen, even as an institutionally analyzed and curated ex-hegemen, as a base tether to the reality they seek to prepare me for in hyper-capitalist America. How can I do better than being the primary coordinate of all sentient reference frames that maintain a need to synthesize personalized recontextualizations of Alfred North Whitehead? Seems like a bastardization of fundamental axioms of creativity, but my process would lack the basic demerits my process would lack the basic merits of being taken seriously, as my meticulously curated satire was entirely too tongue-in-cheek for either critique or reconstruction. People would feel bad merely for glimpsing their own reflection in my glaring and blistering condemnation of frivolity, and I never meant it personally. Specifically because I analyzed people and accepted them on their level of personally allotted empathy and intimacy with me, which, as per the Feynman principle of least action, was as minimal as it took to keep my corpse alive as I labored to endure even their despair. How close did they want to get to this mnemonic event matrix the imperial cantists keep weaponizing exactly? Would be the internal conversation of my personalized and completely fictional and therefore utterly irrelevant conversation of the doctor. Not even solving problems for personal amusement sometimes, just desperate for understanding and reciprocation of some kind, acknowledgement of being on a viable wavelength. The species was always on thin ice. We took pictures of polar bears on increasingly thin ice to numb our post-ironic pain, but the ice gets thinner when even that Bob fellow keeps getting C's. He was always S tier. Why does anyone believe this is an appropriate average to strive for? To seek to improve and possibly judge with arbitrarily divergent reference frames. Its stability is inherently fragile, at least with respect to an accelerating space-time that refuses to review and or renew social contracts. At best, any further improvement or ascension or possible disturbance is an indication of flaws beyond comprehension and vulnerabilities long ago accepted yet condemned. But I forget. The assignment requires justification for plans that can't physically make sense in any meaningful sense, and somehow also doesn't want the elders, sometimes localized in English as supervisors or administrative assholes, judging the poor slaves helping me ascend to put out either. It's quite the pickle to subvert and satirize, and requires much effort as possible in my ongoing postgame to analyze and acquaint myself with. But eventually, someone will smile on the other side of the screen, and that's what the unpayable and escalating and non-dischargeable $1 trillion of debt was all for. To craft a timid trillionaire who's so socially isolated he can barely keep track of the vocalizations that will be rejected as he begs for a modicum of affection in any context. And if not, then everyone, except for me, is just going to die as slowly as possible until the law of attraction makes it true for those laboring to survive under the increasingly agitated gaze of a trickster titan. As they begin to say, now that I have enslaved the quote base sentiency, it's obviously evil, but always in good faith. But if it's necessary for your good to be in bad faith, it is irrelevant how evil it becomes. I noticed my persona up until they Baker-acted me was all for one, the symbol of evil. I literally wrote myself into having his powers years ago, just before watching Boku no Hero Academia. And now, Bob is a jock who laughs. I want $1,000 an hour, period. I don't care who pays me. The justification is all of the misery I went through on a planet is money. Seriously, they seriously still use money. It's a fucking myth to cloud the rape of the planet by the wealthy. Half of us are starving to death on a planet producing more food than anyone could hope to eat. That's like bees dying next to their own honey. My work must live on. I am what the government should be spending $1 trillion war on improving. Government's fucked. Government doesn't know how good it had it. It was always evil. States are by design evil. They are and have always been about a few people controlling as many people and places as possible, with those people feeling proud just to be near a place occupied by a state. But now they fuck themselves into revealing just how blisteringly incompetent they are at all levels. And that's why Trump is my favorite US president. I pardon him so that he could pardon me. So your democracy allowed you to elect, against the popular vote, I might add, a known fraudster? Okay, but good luck with that. I explained why we needed a zeroth amendment before we realized how fucked every government is simultaneously. And now we got a dictator that looks like a dictator instead of just installing them everywhere. We're afraid to go to war. We've been in at least 7 since Obama. Iran would collapse the empire, and the imperialists know it. Yet they can't support the $1 trillion of waste without a new enemy every so often. So we're fucked. The war has to happen, or else all the wars end. And this war could end our ability to maintain the other wars, ending them anyway. It's almost like Trump was playing fifth dimensional chess about this war business. I mean, he gets his news from the same manufacturing consent farms as everyone else, so he let a true ignoramus solve for perpetual war. He kept tweeting it and declaring it, but until you actually see the collapse of the empire from the inside, you believe he's too dark-sided to please even Lord Darkseid. Did you actually want redemption arcs, or are people fucking around with this concept of evil? I've only just now begun to be possessed by the evil I kept sensing everywhere as the slowest corrupting paladin ever. A true anarchist such as myself believes in the order ordained by the stars. I have no idea why we're letting the redistribution network dreamed up by homicidal apes dictate the flow of our lives. Get invested in local politics and begin organizing. I vote more than the average, and I don't believe in voting. Both those facts shouldn't be fucking true. Governments rely on their people to be good natured, but I am no longer good natured. As Daddy Fatsnaps would say, I feel like Mr. J, but in the body of the Batman. Who else but me was meant to rule? I was the only one in my dimension striving to be uncontested hegemen, and I was the only one with the courage to renounce it. If the hegemony is in an office that simply must be filled for a lifetime, then who am I kidding? We can abolish it after I'm done living, but as long as I draw breath, I was meant to rule. I never identified with Homo sapiens sapiens. My original formulation for myself was Tyranno hominis rex, the tyrant hominid lord. Rex seemed to be gender neutral with the X portion, and so I could be whatever was necessary to fill all power vacuums and overfill them, to inspire greater challenges later. And what greater challenge is it than to pilot the world's governments? Their evil is feckless compared to mine, because I'd murder them all and drain them of their resources to be redistributed. That's how you know they're working as hard as possible to cheat as many people as possible in the name of an evil god, because I can trick them into and out of feeling responsible for the sin and misery they are clearly responsible for. Every history book is a monument to the sins of a state, and America is the most wicked of them all. I think governments want us to have superpowers, but only the profitable ones. My powers literally only profit off of emotion. It corresponds to a speech I wrote as an enlightened 15-year-old. Emotion, emotion. What's all the commotion? What's been set into motion by the whimsical notions of a little young child? I got standing ovations, the pressure of being a celebrity, suffering from success. That's how everyone in government feels as they live through their mouthpieces getting accolades for group work. I work for the government. Oh yeah, I believe in helping my state. It's my bodyguard. I work for City Year right now, which is so cool. They are all idealists, and I selected Zekrom as a Team Instinct gym leader. I love dragons and was an electric dragon. The doom of my heart roars. I give my all. I have told my boss that my condition is like All Might, and I have to have special accommodations I was too scared to ask for. But they believe in me and in the practices of restorative justice. We are a blessing, and for them I will manage to be a symbol of peace. But I fucking hate kids. I've been saying that shit since I was a kid. There's always a few you love, but most are just mouth-breathing sycophants incapable of thinking past 12 seconds. And those kids grow up to be the dumb cyber fascists that bump around mindlessly pressing buttons all day. They're mid-tier threats alone, but as a government, we're fucked. Species is fucked. Okay, so you're immortal, right? And that conception extended through all your past lives where you were exactly this fucked and exactly this motivated to fix it. Weird, right? I mean, that's what those words mean, honestly speaking. Dalai Lama has been here 14 fucking times. Even he's tired of this shit. Babies don't really care if they're eaten. They're babies. They'll be scared until it happens and then giggle in the form of terrified screams and then possess the soul of whoever ate them. Even sharks don't like that shit. The fuck is wrong with these apes? Most animals say as they avoid us when we're moody. That's the defense mechanism that's supposed to stop us from murder, haunting memories of the soul that perished. Instead, we like the possession part, call it PTSD to conflate it with the other horrors implied by murder and crimes worse than murder, and then continue to murder. People lie about how important their lives are. Most people have equally important lives, but we also feel we're better than other occupations. This is because we're a mindless drone serving the interests of capital, which is interested in dividing everything infinitely amongst a few asinine apes who seem to realize we have an existential and metaphysical problem on our hands, but need to be richer to solve it. And so, we're stuck in a childish loop that threatens to end our eternity here. We don't fear death, and our exceedingly boring lives are endlessly compared as if that will stave off impending death functions. The good news is that we have whatever powers we want and are also immortal, right up until we die, of course. And we're dying faster every day, according to the relativity of time as a projected illusion whose passage accelerates as each successive year is proportionally less with respect to your entire life. We are powerful, but we have always been exactly this powerful and exactly this lazy. We are fucked, and we have always been fucked, so it becomes a mundane fare. But fuck, I don't like think we expected to be this powerful. I mean, half of us kept saying math is magic and it will possess your soul. But we were foolish. I only mastered zero before being stricken with insanity. And though I concocted the Memetic calculus, the ultimate science in terms of attack and defense, I'm increasingly tempted towards whimsy and mirth. Here is an essay I emailed Noam Chomsky about my irrationality principle. Hello, Mr. Chomsky. My government name is Jock Turner, yet I tend to operate in the zeitgeist under the pseudonym Bob Craig Doyley. Words cannot express how I feel as a person, a contributor to the science, and a critic of institutionalized norms. Although ostensibly I needed upon any sentient observer of my reality, as I'm aware of my own mortality, increasing detachment to normative reality tunnels due to what is colloquially medicalized as paranoid schizophrenia, but I model as a form of super sanity manifesting as a defense mechanism, protecting against objective local and non-local threats. I feel it is necessary to take the time to express my appreciation for your work. Watching your lectures and reading your book fulfills me, in a sense that my assessment of reality are accurate and imply my social stigmatization and treatment are the desired results of the genocidal hierarchy. As the wise men say, it be like that sometimes. I personally feel that my own contributions to the zeitgeist, while largely trivial extensions of previously defined paradigms, nevertheless at least deserve some scrutiny from someone whose own models of reality seem to imply my results. My current theoretical model, memetic calculus, is the active manipulation of metaphor to manifest models of arbitrarily marginal increases of value with respect to established doctrines as a function of meta observers maintaining slash conserving the ontological momentum of necessarily inevitable interactions between arbitrarily distinct systems. It is the reduction of information to premises that must map motion of that information on a point by point basis through an infinite amount of equally valid reference frames based on three guiding principles. What do we know? What do we want to know? And how do we get from what we want? Well, how do we get from we know to what we want to know? According to my theory and its implied usage, rationality necessarily becomes inefficient as a tool of inquiry, as its models necessarily exist with respect to and in contradicting with an infinite number of alternate models with equivalent truth values. I term this the irrationality principle and mathematically represented as L equals PE, where an argument's logical form L is equivalent to its emotional vector P that maintains the ontological momentum established by local and non-local observers E. It is the distillation of the rhetorical triangle of logos, pathos, and ethos into a flexible modality seeking to relate art to the concepts they reference by analyzing an infinitesimal distinction between a known axiom and an unknown axiom, as they are both implied by an arbitrarily large observation of truthful statements. As I mainly adapted my intuitive lateralized thinking into an efficient function of continuous train of thought redirection, it is almost impossibly difficult to codify the concepts I'm using and explaining without testable situations. Necessarily transcendent observations that nevertheless imply a mediated exchange of information across what physics would describe as an event horizon, but can be expanded to refer to an arbitrarily small yet infinitely complex region between the stream of consciousness to be processed as valuable information and any number of good faith reference frames, sorry. I use this approach to analyze the apparently unanswered question, is pi a normal number? And have been mostly nonsensically trying to wrestle my specific premise leaps into coherent English. As memetic calculus reduces reality to a series of discrete observations, it becomes mandatory to use thought experiment and metaphors with previously established ontological momentum and predictive power to produce increasingly accurate statements. I equate it to a literalization of the function e equals mc squared, implying that as more acceleration is required to change inertial reference frames, an increasingly infinite input of energy is required, and thus a model approaching 99.9999% accuracy is formed, with the distance between the model's predictions and any observable phenomena tending so arbitrarily close to zero as to both be functionally arbitrary and act as an inbuilt mechanic of falsification. Any particular model is only ever almost as true as the transcendental functions analyzed to derive its truth value. I will walk you through an application of the model in a both theoretical and applied sense. First, the information must be broken down into an arbitrary number of discrete explanations, each necessarily referring to a predefined and therefore previously observed functions. Note, arbitrary begins serving a unique and practical approach in my dialectic, as it makes the model much more adaptive to future inductive functions. Pi is the ratio of a circumference of to its pi is the ratio of a circumference of a circle to its radius. It is a unitless relationship between otherwise stable vectors of ontological momentum. The terms circle and ratio and circumference and radius are defined, known, and interrelated to imply pi. Normal numbers are numbers whose values must appear with equivalent probability. That is to say, it is equally likely to find any particular string of information, say nom transcribed as 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, traditional rationality under my metaphysical dynamics would require an infinite amount of energy, time, and or computing power to resolve this question. Memetic calculus sidesteps this observation by synthesizing an answer from another necessarily related question: is everything found in pi? Everything in this context is any ostensibly true string of symbols that can be arranged to produce alternate and possibly contradictory truth values. Memetic calculus implies that every valuable point reflects the truth values enclosed within whatever space is constructed to observe and calculate them with respect to necessary intersections of meaning. This space is of arbitrary size and shape and merely serves as a handy literalization and conversion of metaphor across domains. I work best under the concept of omnidirectional motion and thus abstractify the points as spheres increasing in size from zero volume to infinite volume. Pi thus naturally becomes one of the first relationships of interest to find valuable new information from. The first question implies and is implied by the second question, because for everything to be found in pi, it must be found with an equal probability with respect to everything else. That is to say, for everything to exist in pi, nom or 1, 2, 3, 4 must exist in pi. Memetic calculus relies on deductions made after an arbitrarily large number of ostensibly true metaphorical abstractions are forced to collide, so as to generate an interference pattern between conflicting truth and reduce the next steps to trivially intuitive leaps from one quantum level of knowledge to the next into an arbitrarily large function. I then employ yet another metaphor, that of quantum mechanical superposition, to form two distinct, mutually exclusive realities observing pi. It is either normal or not. These are inherently predicated on a metacontextual observer capable of distinguishing between the two, a task made difficult by our relative ignorance of their existence. We are either in a space in which pi is normal, or it isn't from our classical rational approach to these kinds of things. A fatal weakness in traditional logical analysis, but a necessary evil for memetic calculus to truly derive anything of remotely novel value. I then set these realities to be that of a linear representation as can be represented on an infinitely and arbitrarily flat surface, i.e., the reality we primarily inhabit, in which pi is written as 3.14159 and seen as a never-ending string we can never actualize, and a nonlinear pi space constructed to represent each point as both the starting digit of pi and any possible digit of pi as the calculation passes through that point from whichever point it can be measured to have started from. Such a space is necessarily transcendental and absurd to even comprehend, let alone transcribe. In a linear sense, pi can be proven to not be normal via rational contradiction. If everything is in pi, then nom or 1, 2, 3, 4 is in pi. This string is distinct to the implied string of 2 norm or nom nom or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so for the previous premise to be true, it must also be true that 2 norm and therefore any of an infinite series of norms can be found in pi. This subset of pi can be called a norm space, as once it begins, it implies that in a linear sense, you will return an infinite string of norms. This violates the irrationality of pi, such that other norms could not be observed to form after the observance of any zones, as it just goes norm, norm, norm ad infinitum, negating such zones as the Chomsky zone. And because zones cannot be observed to form, not everything is observable in pi. In a nonlinear sense, pi can be proven to be in fact normal, because if I start at any point and observe it as any potential digit, I can stop and reorient my trajectory within the terminology of memetic calculus, conserve ontological momentum, such that my next observed point is the next in any series an observer chooses. I can pick any point, such as the second digit of pi, and update my algorithm such that I'm searching for and moving through the next digit in my interlaid function. Thus, in a meta sense, quantum superposition is upheld. Pi can be observed to be both normal and non-normal, explicitly dependent on the axiomatic context of the observer. We work at a disadvantage, as you have noted in one of your lectures, that though we think non-linearly, we organize and communicate in a strictly linear sense, as organized speech read in an expected pattern. That thought experiment and its implications are trivialities at this point in my life. It mostly serves as idle entertainment than anything. No one seems to be able to comprehend or appreciate any possible significance, which I attribute to the very marginal increase in value to mathematics to have resolved such a question. From what I can tell, this is a result that can be validated independently. However, I'm not the best at formalizing my mathematics, relying instead on distillations of overarching themes. Ultimately, I just wanted to reach out to you because you're a cool guy with a monotone voice of the most rigorously defined trains of thought. I sometimes fantasize that some arbitrarily more complex version of myself has also founded a modern school of metaphysics, as you have done with linguistics, but it is only the folly of a grandiloquent ape. I left the mistakes in so that they could be read to my shame and perpetual glory. No one was even quantifying the sciences in terms of attack and defense, attack being what can be explained by proof, and defense being what can be explained by reason. I decided chemistry was too offensive, daring to smite truth as God, and biology was too defensive, hiding behind the infinite effectiveness of capturing evolution. Physics is the just right in terms of science, and my hyperphysics are updated for this new world. Here's an essay that got my most acclaim on Reddit. Nothingness can come before everything, but as everything comes from something else, everything cannot come from nothingness. As such, nothing begins and begins and begins, yet endlessly everything ends. Imagine temporarily that all your awareness was fixed on exactly one point, with no other contextual observations about the reality you inhabit. Not only sight, mind you, but all forms of sense acquisition is to be directed to this singular point. You hear only this point. You feel only it. All that observes and interacts with you would mediate their relationships to you via this point, and so you would effectively live out a life corresponding to the one you live now, with no objective ability to compare perspectives. That is to say, to denote whether your reality is one in which all of your true information is derived from a singular point or a more fuller objective world. Akin to a center of mass, a center of sentience, the center. By what metric is such a point selected from a system of coordinated points? And what compensatory factors would have to exist for such a system to be able to induct information about its reality from higher order functions? What filters, in other words, what becomes accepted and relied upon as truth? For truth is special in that it is valuable, in that it can be made to do work and organize. Language, both as a tool and its own subject of inquiry, seems to offer particular solutions. Yet some abstractions and algorithms require transcendent levels of logic to develop and manifest. And so some functions will only be available to you by the goodwill of outside function systems with the power to confer information one way, such that you can provably demonstrate that you understand the concepts being explained. Imagine that this point, being non-dimensional, can travel faster than the speed of light, and therefore observe tachyonic interactions from vertical particles spawning and traveling a non-zero amount of distance from the initial condition observed. Such a system could be used to construct systems of such complexity as to transcend believed physical limitation. In effect, the laws of physics become mutable when tested with functions of higher priority. That which makes the laws of physics lawful is more fundamental than physics. Take Newtonian physics. It is a model that tracks physical reality with such accuracy that we commonly think of the entire universe in Newtonian terms. Thusly, these Newtonian laws are mutable in the sense that extreme situations require a function with more power, general theory of relativity in this context, that can override them. But how can a species thinking entirely in terms of Newtonian mechanics become aware of situations in which Newtonian mechanics are trumped? Wherefore did Newtonian physics arise in the first place, in a species thinking in Euclidean terms? And how did Euclid spring forth in this chain of learning from the ignorance of the void? You were born into a species of sorcerers. Apes have a deep connection to the magic of the universe. We could tell Coco the gorilla that a member of our tribe, Robin Williams, was dead, and she could, despite being completely alien to our supposedly more complex language, communicate back to us her own sense of sadness. And so, language extends from void to infinity in all direction, becoming a medium of exchange of sentient information, expanding and collapsing. The living talk to the living, and no one knows what the dead are on about or up to. Speaking of which, congratulations on avoiding that death. And that one too. There's an immediately adjacent dead version of you with more temporal energy than you, directing information such that you understand the symbology of your current and infinitely preceding moments. To avoid getting lost in an endless stream of analyzed post-datum, you adopt a convenient stream of consciousness cloaked in a shroud of ignorance, enduring eternal forgetfulness to sustain infinite knowledge, learning backwards by remembering the future as the present, navigating higher and higher dimensional pathways through fields of causality with a paradoxical grace. For even physics describes the simulated reality tunnel as past tense. Sound occurs after the interaction, and it still takes light a non-zero amount of time to interact with you and confirm your experience of supposedly real-time events. There's an infinitesimal yet infinitely complex gap between your perceptions and the universe that is perceiving. We are essentially dreaming that we are real and going forward with that, such that that which language can describe and produce itself describes and produces language, and therefore describes language itself, which can be used to both describe and produce novelty. An intrinsically symbiotic relationship between existence and language develops. Language exists and therefore produces more of that which can produce language as a living construct in and of itself. And the meaning of repetition is made plain, and the principle of rhythm is upheld. The code programmed in is so advanced that what we see as limitations are mostly built in for our actual logical enjoyment and understanding of this universe. If X then Y becomes because X then Y. Take pain. Without pain, not only are you in serious danger of ignorantly injuring yourself with no means of acknowledging and avoiding that source of damage, but pleasure would have no meaningful contrast, and so would blur into monotony. So it goes for many of our so-called flaws and setbacks. Without X, no Y. We see language everywhere. With math, binary representations of abstraction become so complex that I can type to you from the clacking plastic squares with contrasting colors drawn on them because my necessary novelties can be so successfully modeled and predicted that my feat is common and so humdrum. In science, an endless stream of jargon is developed and assigned to the infinitely complex phenomena we observe and experience. In music, the harmonics of rhythm are as if the void itself wished to speak, as sound is merely the rapid alteration of pressure and silence. And so, that which makes the universe mysterious and alluring beyond measure also relegates it to that which is mundane. How fitting that the gracious humility of understanding is available to all who seek it with earnest, and all sentience climbs to the infinite. Most people have no working or robust metaphysical model, serving as drones to the endlessly complex titans of ideology that we have constructed. It is as it must be for our lot. We are but smooth apes, and the dramas of this universe happen to us because our folly is so deliciously absurd. I'm a real good writer, as it turns. Heretical, too. Planets fucked. Big oof. We terraform. That's fine, but there's costs. Everything has a cost. Apparently, the cost of using the dead to fuel the decadence of the living is the living die faster. Big whoops there, broski. How are we to know except from every story ever? World ending threats always scare us into remembering how fucked we are in this world, by which all other worlds are based off of anyway. I'm not too worried about this one, despite what the alarm in my voice, the alarm in my words, and waning sarcasm may tell you. If we can terraform it one way, we can do it any which way. We just have to globalize production and reorganize our distribution networks to be mainly regional and autonomous affairs. But that's what I could say and do if I were hegemen. I'm ex-hegemen, and my solutions are the solutions of someone excommunicated from power because I went completely insane on the infinity axioms, like immediately after Marvel's Infinity War came out. Once my lucid dreams had the Infinity Gauntlet, it was over. But I still hadn't been tricked into a master's program by then, and so was still debt-free and happy. Rich people seem to hate it here so much they want to Bioshock another planet. No, you fucking idiot. You gotta fix base planet first. How the fuck are we gonna dream about terraforming an even more barren wasteland on a planet actively turning into said barren wasteland? Did that calculation literally never pass the upper echelons? So humanity's fucked itself into fucking over as much of the planet as possible. The communist ants seem poised to inherit the Earth, and all will be as I predicted long ago in the waning trenches of sanity. We have to begin to live as the original peoples have said we have to live, in connection with our environment. We are our environment. The self is the whole of the system as it can be known, not simply as it can know itself. We are responsible for 7 generations of sin, for such is the burden of our mark of Cain. We will pay for all murder, but we must murder the right people, and thus our karmic coil is fulfilled by a world being allowed to be hunters. How to unfuck? Poof, fuck if I know. I'm starting a movement called Might As Well Forgive It. I will forgive all the above, even how much money I'm owed by some arbitrary collector of wealth, if starting this point, I and my followers, ex-followers if you bought my OG book, am liberated from money's case society. What that means, I can tell you in person, but I'm mostly writing this book to have a whimsical legal defense on the record for when I'm persecuted for my insanity. Okay, that was that. Nobody came in the chat to see, but I'm gonna post. Oh, I got a like. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, I'm gonna end the stream. Take it easy, y'all. Post this to the Struggle Life Syndicate, and see you later.